Hi geographers, welcome to this help video which is intended to give you a little bit of structure to the 20 mark question that you've got coming up on your progress test. So the question says, the size of major stores of water change over time more because of human activity than natural variation. To what extent do you agree with this statement? If we look back over the question, it's clear that we've got to focus on a few things as part of our answer. So primarily, we want to be focusing on the major stores of water. So thinking about what those major stores are, things like the oceans and cryosphere, and we want to think about how they change over time. Now that is quite vague in so much as we could be considering a number of different timescales here, from very short term, sort of days, weeks, months, up to much longer term changes over thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. We also want to think about whether those changes are more the result of human activity or whether it comes back to natural variation and how much of a balance there is between those two things. We also then want to make sure that we're very clear about the extent that we agree or not with that statement. And it's absolutely fine if you chose to disagree with it rather than agree with it. You can argue your response to this question either way, provided you're supporting your points properly. As a bit of a reminder then of the sorts of things we should do in a 20 mark response, first thing we should have in our answer is an introduction, and that introduction should do a couple of things. Firstly, it should unpick the key terminology. So many of the things I've just highlighted there. What do we mean by the major stores of water? What are they? How big are they? What do we mean by changes over time? What do we mean by human activity or natural variation? And then finally, we should also make sure that we state our viewpoint. So you should come down on one side or the other. You should either agree or disagree with that viewpoint. You could strongly agree or you could partially agree. You could strongly disagree or you could partially disagree. Never sit on the fence and say that it's completely even, and never come down completely in favour of one or the other. We want to have a little bit of balance, a little bit of contrast within our answer. Then thinking about how we might structure the main body of a response to that question. Now you could look at human factors and then look at physical factors, or you could take a sort of for and against viewpoint. I'm going to talk you through maybe the first way of structuring that, but equally, if you wanted to do a for versus against, then you'd actually be making the same points, just maybe in a slightly different way. So the main forms of human activity that we could consider are things like climate change, deforestation, groundwater abstraction, and probably also agriculture. And obviously there are some links between agriculture and deforestation, agriculture and climate change, and so on. So that's one side of our argument. We could think about how those human activities are having an influence on the size of major stores of water. On the other hand, we also need to be aware of how natural variation is playing a role. So we could think about some of the natural processes that exist within the water cycle that naturally move water from one store to another. And we could think about, in the short term, things like seasonal changes and how those seasonal fluctuations can affect the size of different stores of water. We could also think about longer term changes, those sorts of changes associated with glacial and interglacial periods. So as we move between those warmer and colder parts of an ice age, how that has an influence on the size of some major stores of water. When you're addressing some of those points, and it's not necessarily that you would be able to address all of those points within an answer, you wouldn't have time to do that. So you want to make sure that you pick a couple from each side of that table and able to explain those concepts and activities and variations coherently. You're able to give detailed reasons how and why they impact on the major stores of water. And you also want to be able to try and relate your responses to examples as well. So that could be from case studies like the River Exe or the Amazon rainforest, or it could be other little mini examples that we've looked at along the way in this course. But you must make sure that your points are relating back to examples that you've studied. There's also an opportunity here for a little bit of a twist in your answer in terms of trying to just think about the subtleties and the sophistication of that response. So the question says over time, but over what time scale? Do you think that some of those activities have more of an influence in the short term, whereas others have more of an influence in the long term? Are some more important or impactful or significant than others? So within human activity, for example, there might be 3 or 4 things we could write about, but is one of those more important or significant than the other? Then that should lead us into the conclusion. And the conclusion should be a drawing together of the main body of your answer. You need to make sure you leave enough time for this when you're writing it up. And you need to make sure that you summarize the main points of your essay. So summarize what the main human activities and natural variations are and how important they are in terms of changing the natural sizes of those stores of water. And then again, you should come back to that viewpoint. Do you agree, disagree, strongly, partially? And your main reason for believing that. Why do you strongly agree, or why do you partially disagree with that statement? Reinforce the reason for that. It's very important that you've got an idea of your viewpoint before you start writing that question. Finally, then, you are allowed to bring a plan of that answer into your progress test to help you. It should only be about half a page. That could be some bullet points, it could be a mind map, or it could be using the template that I have sent you as well. So have a go at planning that. Make sure you've got some bullet point brief ideas about where you're going to go. Don't write your answer out really small and then try and copy it up again in 20 minutes. I just want you to bring a plan, an outline of what you want to say, so that you can then add the depth and detail to that in time conditions in one of our lessons in a couple of weeks.